Hey, story fans, it's your old pal, the writing ref. I don't hate, I just officiate your favorite movies. This time, we'll be looking at a request from Katie D, where she asked me to take a look at the Free State of Jones. Now, this particular movie with Mathew McConaughey in it was first a nonfiction book, and I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to explore how to transition nonfiction book events and spin it into legend. And we're going to do that right now.
Attack me with all your strength.
I mean, the best parts about Star Wars is there is no good or evil.
All we need to win are the fellas in this room right now.
Alright, story fans, and remember, if you are enjoying my breakdowns like this, please hit the subscribe button, hit that bell to follow, and give me a like and share with your friends who love to read or want to learn how to write better. I'm really glad that I got this request because I've got a project that I'm working on. It's in revision on the Ukraine conflict. And there's been some nonfiction written, but I figured that I could take a lot of these nonfiction events and focus on some of the legends of the warriors that inspired and gave hope to Ukrainians during the first 3 years of the war. This request is a great opportunity to take a look at a very good nonfiction book, which I would highly recommend reading. I got it on audiobook. The book's called The Free State of Jones, Mississippi's Longest Civil War by Victoria E. Bynum. And she really breaks down in this book not just the history that you see in the movie, but the entire history of the region, the conflicts between different families, some key families in the area, and then she compares and contrasts two different historical writers who happen to be related to the main historical figure, Newton Knight. First is Ethel Knight, and the other is Tom Knight. And one wrote sort of an account of the history that prefers the racist version of things, someone that was influenced her whole life in Ethel by the lost cause myth, and Tom Knight, who had no illusions over how slavery influenced the situation. So we have a very interesting situation here, and that Hollywood has to take this delicate material and still get people to feel and wonder and see that there were people in the Confederacy that were victimized by this whole situation as well, and learned to change. Now, the first thing you need to understand about this story is that Newton Knight and a bunch of deserters standing against the Confederacy successfully, and then their descendants being part of the civil rights movement in a rather significant way about interracial marriage. All of this is tinted in legend of sort of this Robin Hood figure who stole from the rich plantation owners and gave back to the poor, and stood against the war, and all kinds of things that you had conflicting accounts and everything. So this is very much a legend that Victoria, as an author, had to piece together and try to find the best analysis of what the true story was. So now when you're making a Hollywood version of it, we have to take the true story, reinsert a bit of the legend into it to get people hooked and excited about these events and caring, but also not discredit the truth of the matter. One way to examine how to meet this goal is to look at what changed between a historical account and what a fictional account portrays. In the Free State of Jones, the film, we start out on the battlefield on the Civil War, that we meet this nephew of Newton Knight's. Well, in reality, Newton Knight didn't have a nephew that came to battle with him, but there were a lot of soldiers this age that were suddenly conscripted and sent to the front. So it would have been a factor in any soldier deciding to desert, as Newton Knight later does, to have seen these kids come out and get killed. And a lot of them would have been family members, just not Newton Knight in particular. In fact, the real reason that Newton Knight defected, as told in the nonfiction account, is that he learns that his farm's horses and livestock were being stolen by the Confederacy, and he returned home to deal with that. In the movie, he sort of sees that happening as he comes back to bury his nephew. And this is a slight twist on history itself, because he had been given leave. Like, he got permission from his commanding officer to go back and bury his father, who had died recently at home. In fact, even Victoria doesn't really know why Newton Knight joined the Confederacy to fight in the first place. And the best that she could tell as the nonfiction author, from all the accounts, was that he just wanted to be a soldier, even though he would have been conscripted anyway. And sometimes when you know you're going to be conscripted, it's better to just join up. And I think that was a lot of people's attitude during the Vietnam War itself, because I know that I have relatives that, rather than being drafted, joined up and joined the Air Force or something where they knew they wouldn't be a frontline soldier. And eventually, Newton Knight did become sort of this backline medic type person, as portrayed in the film. But that was after he went home to bury his father and then came back to the fight. He became that type of person. Now, something that would have been really interesting to see in the film is that when you're a deserter, you have patrols looking for you. And he would have had to evade these patrols. It would have been a great adventure. The film had a lot of story to tell, and so I can understand why they cut out that and just had him be able to go home with this body of his nephew and then discover all the atrocities happening at home. Through a little bit of twisting of the real history, you get an emotional connection of this family member that has been lost during the war, which there was always potential of, and now you've got a good inciting incident for a story arc. So I mentioned this previously, but the second thing that needs to happen when you're converting nonfiction to fiction is to choose your key moments that you're going to fictionalize so that you give a proper emotional character arc. The Free State of Jones has a problem with this, and in fact I have to call a penalty on it. It's a new penalty: too much timeline confusion. The film starts out with the Civil War and goes for a while until Newt Knight meets his love interest Rachel as a slave who helps him go into hiding. Then all of a sudden you are brought forward, to 1949, and it's like, what the heck is going on? And it takes a while for the audience to get its bearings. Now, in the nonfiction account, we kind of start with that court case, and then we go back and back and back and back. I do understand why you want to drop the audience into the Civil War to start with, because that's really the action sequence that you can start off with, and really it's the conflict that is central to what all this is about. So it is a difficult task for this movie to pick its key moments and put them in sequential order. And here comes Crypto to say hi, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, I think I would have tried to start the movie with the court case, even add dialogue that wasn't there originally, if I had to make the audience understand that, all right, this court case is about the heritage of this young man, but we need to go all the way back to the Civil War to explain it. And then you go back to Civil War. And you start with a short scene that really orients the reader. And you have to choose scenes wisely. And sometimes I think you have to even create events that didn't happen, which are just little explainers for exposition. Another movie that does this well is the Flags of Our Fathers film. Flags of Our Fathers is one of my other favorite historical nonfiction books, and you have several accounts in that book of different conversations that took place and whatnot on the propaganda tour after the Marines raise the flag and they come home, and they take place on this war bonds tour, and they have to condense all that into one conversation, and they do that pretty well in the movie. So they created a conversation which covers a lot of different things that the author covered. Similarly, they could have done that with the court case, and probably did to a certain extent in the film, but you can always take a little bit more liberties when creating a fictional arc. The last thing that I want to talk about when transitioning nonfiction or history, fiction or legend, is to not desecrate the truth, but enhance it. And the way you have to be very careful about that is to understand your own biases and really research and look for the experts on the situation if you are not quite the expert yet. For instance, some films that do not hold up so well for the truth include John Wayne's version of The Alamo. John Wayne version of the Green Berets.
One week from tonight, at the Ocosto plantation.
Do you trust her?
Of course. She's my brother's wife.
And the Glenn Powell acted Hitman movie, where you have this actual guy named Gary Johnson who would go undercover pretending to be a hitman and then get people arrested. That's an interesting story, but they created a fiction around it that every single thing is completely fiction. Has nothing to do with the real Gary Johnson. In fact, the character in the movie ends up killing a crooked cop at the end, and the movie has to tell you, yeah, sorry, all of that part was fiction. Otherwise, and you better have stayed around for the credits for that, or you would have thought, oh my God, was this a true story, and how much of it was true? So they took an interesting premise for a job that a guy had, and they realized that would be only interesting for so long, for maybe about 20 minutes, and then had to create this romance story and everything. I don't know if it desecrates the truth as much as, we used to when we used to whitewash everything or whatever. And I understand there's controversy over movies like The Sound of Freedom. And something that the Free State of Jones does really well is it upholds the truth of the situation. For example, Rachel becoming a lover, that happened. The fact that she was raped happened, but it was over and over by different masters, and she was known to have had several children with the people that raped her. And that's something that you don't have time to touch on or get into the gruesomeness. There are so many gruesome things that happen to the slaves of that era, but the fact that these slaves and then free slaves came together is really powerful. And Moses is a completely fictional character, but unlike how they took Gary Johnson and had a fictional romance with him, Moses, even though not a real character and a fictional person, represents a lot of the black story of how black people went through in that time, especially after the Civil War during Reconstruction, and how horrifying it was. And to have that person be a close friend of a person who is known to have married a black person, I think was a necessary liberty, because in the nonfiction book you can tell lots of different stories about real black slaves and what they endured, but you have to create these conglomerates. So there's a difference between making up a story to make history more interesting and making conglomerate characters like that. And as long as we know the difference, we as authors can all go out and do the same. Well, I'm the Writing Ref, and that's been The Call. Join me next time. Make sure you like and subscribe when we will do another book referral and recommendation.